It hasn't done for me yet. It's still spinning. All right. This is a moment a lot of us have been waiting for. I'm here with one Mr. Gregory Daddario. And while he is typically the one on the interviewer side of things, today we're going to turn the tables and he is going to be an interviewee. So welcome to your own podcast here, Greg. How does that feel?
It's very odd. That's not how I would have introduced me.
Of course it's not. Well, I mean, I think all listeners will learn pretty quickly. I hope you're not looking for any good interviewing skills here. I told Greg before, this is actually more nervous. I'm more nervous to interview him than when he interviewed me. So, Greg, you got to do probably double duty on this one, and I'm just here for the ride.
Fair enough. And I mean, I didn't. So I was originally, because everyone usually says in like the pre-interview, like, oh, I wrote some stuff down. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. But then as we were waiting to set up, I found myself scribbling some notes. So,
yeah. Well, you're nothing if not cultivated and obviously insincere and just a lot of things that are never true. But like, it's just smoke and mirrors, right? I mean, that's everything. That's Greg Daddario in a nutshell. So
yeah, obviously you found me out.
Exactly. So, are you ready? Should we get started?
Let's do this.
All right. I figure the sooner I start asking questions, the sooner I can be quiet. So, number one, tell me a little bit something. If you had to put a label on yourself or something outside of your profession, what might it be, and why, my friend?
So I wanted to go with non-decisive, but then I second guessed myself.
Is that even a word? Isn't it indecisive?
Yeah, whatever.
Fun English.
So there are a lot of labels that probably jump to mind right away in terms of like stuff that I do or things that I'm passionate about. But the more I was thinking a little bit about it, the more I came to the concept of self-disruptive, not destructive, but disruptive. I especially in the last couple of years, I think I've grown more and more interested in sort of seeing where I'm doing the same thing over and over again and like trying to break out of those patterns, trying to sort of change the things that I see are not the best for me. So there's a quote, I know, shocker, by Chuck Palahniuk that says, we'll be remembered more for what we destroy than what we create. And I always saw that as a very sort of like negative quote of like, you know, he's a transgressive author. He wants to talk about destruction, but especially over this last, what's like 13 months or whatever, I think there's real power to that idea, right? Like we can destroy things that are bad within ourselves or within our lives. And like, those should be the things we're remembered for, not the things that are easy for us or that come like without much effort, but the things that really take time, energy, and effort on our part in order to sort of evolve and grow. So yeah, self-disruptive. I like to look at myself objectively and try to change things that I think could make me into a less horrible human.
Well, I think even beyond just like a less horrible human, which you've got a long road ahead of yourself, of course, but like this idea of disruption being kind of a key element of our society right now. I think over the last, 10 years, it's interesting to hear you pair that with destruction, but I think that idea of disrupting the system has really been, you've seen that play out in different places. You've seen it in business. You've seen it now in education. And I think that it's almost like, and you're talking about it as like disrupting patterns to grow, but it's almost like also sometimes taken as like, we need disruptors to help move things forward. So I don't know that it's always about destruction. Or maybe it's burning it down so you can rebuild. But.
Yeah, so there's two things that made me think of. One is one of my favorite quotes about education, which is from Dr. William Ayers, which is teaching is an act of opposition to the given world, right? Like we get into this profession to disrupt in some way, shape, or form, or at least there's something within our reasoning that is disruptive in its nature. And I think you're right. It's a necessary step because status quo will remain status quo unless some sort of disruption occurs. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that made me think about was a story that we used to teach in senior comp and lit. I didn't get to teach it this year, the Destructors by Graham Greene. And so that story is about this group of juveniles like tearing down this beautiful house that was like the last house remaining in war-blitzed London. Mm-hmm. And there's a beautiful line in it where it's destruction is an act of creation, right? Like we're so conditioned to this idea that creation good, destruction bad. But destroying, burning it down to start anew is in and of itself an act of creation and change. And I think there's something powerful to that again, these 13 months of like quarantine and whatever have given me a lot of time to reflect on. So.
Very true. I think that's good. So, I mean, you take some of that, and I think that leads us fairly easily into the next question, but I feel like I'm almost letting you off the hook because as a budding artist, as a budding author, as somebody who just kind of loves music and you're kind of in this humanitarian kind of field, you're a humanities teacher, you're an English teacher, right? So this question about how your profession helps kind of shape or embolden you in your passions, I see a lot of, newsflash, people I kind of know Greg. I guess I'll say I'm his friend. So, I mean, vilify me for it. But I see a lot of your passions and just who you are. And having taught English, I can see a pretty easy connection there. So can you take us down a walk, maybe the things we wouldn't expect, or a way that maybe your job here as a teacher has changed you or helped you find a passion that maybe isn't so related to what you do? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think that was a lot of when I was looking at these questions, which again, I wrote, so I don't know why I was so taken aback by them, but there was a lot of it where it was very much in that same mold of like, I don't do much to hide how I feel and what I'm passionate about in my everyday life. Like I don't really put up any of those guises or put up any of those masks or anything. So what you say is very true. And what I was thinking with this, and I think it goes to it, I kind of cheated. And I cheated because I started to do the passion project in my senior comp classes or the lit class. So I basically make myself dive into a passion every single year. And so like 3 years ago, it was the bread, which I know everyone knows all about. So I'm not going to go too deep into it.
You bake?
I know, crazy, rarely. And then last year, it was getting more into the writing. And I think I've talked to you, like I wrote too many short stories. To say the number is going to make me feel like a jerk. So I wrote a crap ton of stuff over the last year, and it was part and parcel because I started that process in the classroom. And then this year it was the meditation. And again, like I started doing it a little bit before the project started, and I just kept doing it. It's a daily thing. It's like become part of, we talked earlier this week and I was like, oh, I just felt bad. I only got 20 minutes of meditation. And you're like, screw you, right? Like 20 minutes.
I think it was worse than that, but yeah, I was mad at you.
So I think like I take not only the humanities part of the job very seriously, but like the whole concept of if I'm going to ask students to dive into something they're passionate about, then I have to be able to walk that walk as well. And so I guess, call it addictive personality disorder stuff or call it like walking the walk. But like, I'm really passionate about finding new things and sort of letting those passions be like changing all the time. In my discussion with Pam, she asked about like being a free thinker, and she's like, are you a free thinker? And I told her, my problem is I probably think too freely. I don't button down anything, right? Like there's always something different. So I think my profession has helped me not only embolden the passions that deal with humanities, but it's just really given me an outlet to be passionate about stuff. And I think that's cool because, I'm pretty demure as a human being and every other aspect, but I can really get excited about things, and it's another reason on top of everything else that helps me sort of like get up out of bed and go to work every single day.
Man. Well, so then, like as an aside, this question you didn't write, but like, what does it mean to you then when you approach that idea of being open and learning new things and pushing yourself outside the box and being passionate about just being passionate? When often when we push kids to do that, they don't meet it with the same passion, and so is that hard for you when you're trying to really show and grow as a human and you see others around you maybe aren't taking that opportunity, or is that just part of the gig?
So I think yes to both, and I think what's really frustrating is because now getting older, and I have an older brother, so I'm part of that friend group as well. And there's all these people that are in their early or mid 30s who like come up to me and are like, oh, I wish I would have paid attention and like taken those opportunities in high school. And I'm like, yeah, still the same issue today, right? Still happening with the kids that are in front of me.
Want to come talk to my class?
Right. Yeah. And yeah, so it's frustrating, but it's not, because I remember being that age vaguely, little bits. And I like if I had me as a teacher when I was a student, I would probably also be like, who the hell is this guy?
Right.
What does he know? So I don't let it frustrate me in that sense, but it's frustrating because it's like I already know what's gonna happen. Like I already see where these kids are gonna in their later life, they're gonna be like, that was something useful, or I wish I would have taken that opportunity. Because again, I have a saying. I have two sayings in my room. One is don't be a lightning bolt, right? Lightning bolts take the path of least resistance. They do what's ever easiest for them. And so I always want kids to be like, don't be a lightning bolt. Lightning's cool. Don't be one, right? And then the other one is, and it's not mine in any way, shape, or form, but it's I don't need you to think like I think. I just need you to think. I'll meet you wherever you're at, but you got to at least be open to meeting me.
Yeah.
And so I think if you have that sort of as your guide, instead of like, why aren't these kids doing, you know, X, Y, and Z the same way that I'm doing it? I think it sets you up for less frustration, and also lets the kids see that, you know, humans are like that. They're different. They approach things differently. And I think that's a great lesson that we sort of teach at the high school.
I totally agree, man. So, and I promise I'll get back on track here in a minute, but as you were talking, it made me think, like, how much of our role in education do you believe is just like putting things out there for kids to have kicking around in the back of their mind and someday they're going to click, versus no, it's more timely than that. And I know there's elements of both and everything, but I just wonder, as you talk, some of the things, they're big things. Like, these aren't things you could teach in a unit, assess on, and a student's going to grasp. You're really more teaching life lessons. Like, how do you balance that part of the role with maybe the content pieces or the stuff that feels like, hey, you're going to college next year. If you don't write this college essay and I don't help you with this, like, you're missing an opportunity.
Yeah, good question. And if you were reading my short stories I've been sending you, no.
But that's the author's voice. I don't know if it's yours or not, right?
Fair enough.
Or not the author's voice, the character's voice.
Hoist by my own petard, I guess.
Boom.
It is a delicate balance, because there's obviously things, but in one of the stories I wrote, and I read it to some colleagues earlier in the year, so sorry you're getting a double dose of it. Our content is like a menu in a bakery, and once they leave the bakery, it's all just donuts, right? Like, the content is important to all of us, because that's why we got into teaching what we teach. We love our content. Like, it's central to us and important to us, except for those of us who leave to be administrators.
Boom.
Sorry, couldn't not throw one of those in there.
I'm gonna end this now. Thanks. No.
But the content, like, if kids remember when Hamlet says something that shows that he's maybe not crazy but acting crazy, that's great in the moment when I'm trying to get them to that. But if they understand the human condition that's conveyed in Hamlet later in life, and even if they can't put words to it that it's Hamlet, but they're like, oh yeah, this reminds me of something that I've been exposed to, and I sort of get something from this without having to actually have experienced it. And I think that's where a lot of the crossover happens in English, is we're exposing you to stuff, but the stuff itself is one thing, and then the things that are happening in that stuff that we can analyze is something else.
1000%. Yeah, man.
Right? So you're giving them both. You're like, yeah, cool. You might not need to know how to do a rhetorical analysis in the way we're doing it, but by showing you how to analyze rhetoric, you're being exposed to stuff that's going to help you understand society better once you're out of this building.
Very true. Cool, man. So that said, like, I think a lot of our staff knows you as an author in various different ways, right? Whether it's a stencil on the wall that they've read, or whether it's a session that you've led. And I think it's interesting then, like, you can come to a work from a lens that a lot of us can't. I think you can probably put on a hat of a creator, of a written piece that a lot of us can't do, but also as that teacher, kind of like you were just saying, and you can have that piece, you can have Hamlet serve double duty. Whereas I don't know if that was the author's original intent necessarily, you know. So how do you reconcile? Well, I guess first, part one, just talk to us a little about your writing and kind of who you are as a writer, what your goals are, why you're so passionate about that. I think we don't deserve, but I think we'd all be interested in hearing more about Greg the author too. But then how does Greg the author reconcile the fact that here's something that's really valuable to you and something that is powerful, and there's so many people out there, not even just students, that just to read something it's just a big no-no, you know. It's a lot there for you to unpack, but hopefully we'll find a way through it all.
No, so the first thing, I definitely speak of myself in third person as both Greg the teacher and Greg the author. That's the first thing. No. So, okay. I think I'll go backwards. So from the last question to the first.
A good interviewer would have set that up for you better. So now I'm making you do your job a little bit and do both jobs.
Totally fine. So the thought of audience is something that I think a lot of authors are put in the forefront of their mind. And they're really like, when you're writing, it's like, I'm writing this for this group, or I'm writing this for this specific group of people, or this specific demographic, especially if you're trying to monetize it in some way, shape, or form. And so I've always been of the mindset that Vonnegut expressed, which is like, write with an audience of one, right? Like, if you don't like it, no one else is going to like it. And don't try to satisfy anything outside of whatever you're trying to get from whatever it is you're writing. And he says, like, if you open up your window to the entire world, you'll catch pneumonia, right? Like, not everyone's going to like what you're going to write. And that's super difficult at the very beginning to sort of deal with. But the whole idea is, when I write something, it's for me more so than anything else. If someone else digs it, that's awesome. And I think I approached that music the same way when I was younger as well. Like, if I think it's dope, then other people are going to probably like it in some way, shape, or form. Maybe not to the level that I do, but that's fine. Because as long as they're getting something from it, that's fine, because I'm getting what I need. Which sounds really, now that I say that, it sounds really, really, really self-centered. But I think there's something to that self-centeredness that is part and parcel of writing. You're doing something for yourself that just happens to have importance or use for people outside of you.
Yeah. Well, you've talked about your approach to writing being very almost conversational with yourself. So I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing, right? You're and writing, I would agree. Like, I'm not anywhere near the author you are, but like, for me to understand something, I have to write about it. So I think it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think you're onto something there. With just really, it's how you're thinking through something, or how you're processing, whether that's art or music or writing. It needs to hit home first. I think that's a good point.
And so the term I use when I led sessions and when I talk to people, or they ask me to talk about it, is I always like the term narrative distance, right? I want to take something that either I felt, thought, or maybe imagined, and again, it's always a dealer's choice of what that is. The last 4 stories I wrote, none of them have anything to do with each other. It was just stuff that just happened to be popping into my brain. But the way that I approach it is, there is that dialectic voice going on, right? Here's what I think, here's what the other side thinks. How can I sort of have these two in conversation? But then it's always sort of predicated on moving it out of my own head and onto a space where I can actually look at it, right? Where I can see it outside of self. And I think that's the most powerful thing I've gotten out of this entire process, is like, things that I either was like, my guts balled up, or like I just was like frustrated and furious and stuff like that, I've been able to put on the page, and then it's no longer up here. It's out there where I can look at it and I can refine it and I can make use of it and I can learn from it. And I think that's really the crux of my entire desire to write. Is it's a place where you can be self-disruptive. It's a place where you can sort of look at patterns and see them in a different light. And it's a place where I can say, like you said, that's not Greg the person, that's Greg the author, right? That's the author voice that's there. And fiction is so beautiful because it allows you to take something. I could do a story that everything is true except for one detail, and it's just as valid and fictional as the story where everything's made up and it's a conversation that would never actually be had. And so I really love that there's sort of there is something to hide behind, and not hide behind, but like separate from self and say it's not me. And I think you guys have noticed maybe in like the emails on Fridays, I don't sign them as me, because it's not me that's saying that. It's the Wellness Social Committee, right? Like, I don't write under my actual name because I'm a high school teacher and I write about stuff that high school teachers probably shouldn't write about. Right. And so like, I like to create that distance between the act of creation and the creation itself.
So interesting that it went that way, because the next question I wanted to ask, and so I have to apologize a bit here, because I think if you're not in the English world, and if you don't write or have never even tried and failed miserably, as some of us have, or had any success like you may have, I don't know that you can adequately convey like the intimacy it is to share what you write with someone else. And you've been nice enough to do that with me, and I don't think I've reciprocated, because I have not read as much as you've shared with me, and that's a problem I own, and I'm sorry, Greg, and that's real. I'm realizing that as we're talking, as I want to ask this question, because I think it takes a lot for someone to share that much of themselves with someone else. But you don't seem as reserved about things like your artwork or your stencils that are also a creative expression for you. And so I wonder, is like, what's the difference there, or what purpose does that serve for you as opposed to the writing piece? And why might it be more, I mean, I think I know, but maybe not all of our listeners know, but like, why is it easier for you to share something like that, which to a lot of people that have no artistic ability is equally as kind of deflating? For me to draw something in hand is going to be just as embarrassing for me. But for you, how come you can kind of make that separation?
Interesting. It's a good question. So I think it's because the place where these two expressions come from is vastly different, right? Whereas I'm trying to create narrative distance and work through things and maybe even just like get a laugh when writing.
Sure.
The stenciling comes almost entirely out of two things. One, sort of a meditative need to do something with my hands, because the actual like stenciling and cutting takes a long time and is very intricate and, you know, is great because it's time consuming. But the other thing that came out of it was just being cheap about art and like seeing, like, I love art, but like I didn't want to pay for it. And like I had a new classroom. I was moving out of my parents' house. Like I was like, I got to make some art so that I don't have to buy anything. And as I already sort of alluded to, I don't do things halfway. Like if I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna do way too much of it. And so the entire summer between when I was hired here and when I started, instead of finding a house in Sycamore and like doing my due diligence to like live in the community, I was stenciling like every single day, like so many freaking stencils. And like, that's when I still had some desire to sell it. And like, you know, it's in the midst of all the Banksy stuff. So I was like, let's ride this wave of like street art. And so the art for me and the stenciling is something that's like, it's there for the purpose of being seen and sort of glanced at and moved on, right? Like there's not so much depth there or self there. It's the stuff that I think is funny and the stuff that I think people should see. But like, you know, a Run the Jewels stencil doesn't tell you anything more than it's like, oh, cool, Run the Jewels stencil, right? Wile E. Coyote with the Amazon Prime box. There's nothing there that I need to be like, oh, I don't know if I should share this with people.
Sure.
So the writing, I think, is, like you said, much more intimate and much more revealing of me as a person. Whereas the stenciling, which is also done under an assumed name, thank you very much. Mature artists steal, MAS, right? Immature artists imitate, mature artists steal. It's me riffing on pop culture. It's me taking stuff from the internet and repurposing it for my own desires. And so that, in my mind, is something that necessitates just like throwing it out there and getting it done.
Yeah, it's good, dude. I don't want to like. There's some. I see. Here's the problem for me with this interview, right? Like, I want to go down all these rabbit holes, but I know we only have like an hour, and so I kind of want to move things along a little bit. So I think I'm going to change course just a bit, unless, like, I think what people, if they don't know you well, and hopefully they're getting to know you more throughout this year. As a friend, I've watched you kind of blossom in that regard. As much as you want to be a self-proclaimed introvert, like one of the things I wanted to ask you, and maybe you'll want to answer today or not, but I think what's really interesting is, you know, we were standing in front of the board retreat, and you made a joke about yourself. Like, you know, some people are like, oh man, quarantine. And you're like, quarantine, you know, like you're kind of one of those, and I'm the same in a way, but like a self-professed kind of hermit, right? But yet you're so good at pulling things out of people. And I know part of that is your writing and your ability to be thoughtful, and you're just a really good listener. But I wonder, like, do you have anything, and I'll use this as kind of a bridge back, but like, do you have any insight on that? Like, why is someone who is kind of reserved and isn't the life of the party, you're not like your typical social butterfly, why do you feel like it is people will open up and share with you so much?
Yeah.
And if you don't know, it's fine, man.
Yeah, like, I don't know. So there's a couple competing thoughts, right? The first is like, don't analyze it. What are you doing? You're going to lose it, right? Right? Like, as soon as you put it to words, it's gone, right? Part of me is like, have I done a really good snow job? And like, I've paced everybody and I've used hard adjustment myself through. No, I think part of it comes out of just knowing that it is so easy for me to just hermit and fold in, right? And again, I keep on coming back to it, but some of that self-disruptiveness, like understanding it would be very easy for me to close my door, not talk to anyone, put my head down and get stuff done. But I've done that, and I don't really like it's fine and I can deal with it, but it's not what I would prefer. And so I think the other competing thought was, well, when I took a test when I was a child and it tells you like what you could do when you grow up, it was like engineer, teacher, or priest.
Yes.
So
those are two very different things.
Two of those lived. And I don't, I mean, I think you hit on it. Like, I do listen. Like I do listen. I listen to people, and I want people to know that they're heard.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the majority of it, is just having a genuine desire to listen to people and to try to help. Even
And
though
I'm glad you said it, because if you weren't, I was going to say it for you. But like, I do think a lot of it is just, you are very genuine. If there's people, I mean, I opened the podcast obviously joking about this, but like, if people don't, you are very much what you see is what you get in the best possible way. Like, I don't ever think you're trying to pull the wool over somebody's eyes, and you're very much the same way everywhere. And people respond to that. Like, people respond to people who are authentic. So, well, kudos to you, man. And I think you've helped a lot of us realize that maybe it's okay to talk to people and go outside of our comfort zone. So thank you. All right, now I'll take it back to the actual podcast questions a little bit. So you've referenced some authors already, and you've referenced some painters and some artists and things like that. And I'm sure a lot of, if you've been listening to what WWF or PTSD or things like that, people are probably aware of some of your musical kind of influences. But if you had to this broad audience right now, talk about maybe one of those things that's influenced you more than anything else, what might you reference or talk about?
Okay, so I'm not gonna focus too much on these first couple, because everyone's heard me talk ad nauseum. So like, if you haven't caught it yet, all Kurt Vonnegut, can't go wrong.
There you go.
All Don DeLillo, can't go wrong. But there's these two authors that are probably lesser known that I think have been super, super influential. And one's more an editor, but he also wrote a little bit as well. So the first one, and my students know this because I try to use her short stories as often as possible. Hey, Tim. Hi, Tim. Amy Hempel. She's a short fiction writer, and for my money, one of the most underrated authors of all time. And what she's able to do is sort of condense a novel into 6 pages. Like, she's able to use every single sentence to just destroy you in the best ways you possibly can. And so, like, I always laugh, like, with my writing buddies. I say I want to be Amy Hempel, but I'm obviously hitting well below that average. Like, I'm nowhere near as good as she is, but that's the goal. That's the golden standard. And she was a student of one of the sort of acolytes of one of the coolest editors of all time, who's Gordon Lish. And so he was the fiction editor at Esquire for like 40 years. He's the sort of inventor and founder of literary minimalism. He writes really weird, out there books that are just amazing. And so I often reference him because he once said, authors don't have stories, they have sentences. And so again, it's that idea, that sort of like Edgar Allan Poe single effect idea of like, every single thing you put down on the page should have purpose. And if you're not aiming for every syllable of every word and every sentence to like shock and like move your reader, then what are you doing? So I tell people, I like to approach short fiction like it was a piece of poetry. And I like to approach poetry as if it's something that you can't say in any other way. And it's like a white hot thought that you need to just get onto a page. And I think that comes from the reading of Amy Hempel, and the tutelage and reading of Gordon Lish.
Very cool. Anybody outside of authors that maybe has impacted you in ways, like, is there a surprising influence on you that anybody might, I mean, this kind of touches one of the questions down at the bottom, but I think most of your English teacher, of course, has been these authors that have impacted them. Is there anywhere like outside that world where you'd be like, you probably wouldn't think this, but
I mean, a lot of movies as well, but I think it'd be the same thing, right? Like, I love Hitchcock, I love Stanley Kubrick, I love like some of my favorite movies of all time are like Dr. Strangelove, Network, Patty Chayefsky. Like, there's a lot of film that I think, again, has been really influential. Outside of that stuff, yeah. No, I'm going to save that for the next one. It works better for Hidden Street.
Well, that's kind of where I was going to go. So, like, well, before we get there, so English teacher to English teacher, I have this, and I'll bet this transcends English, and I would love actually to have this conversation. Maybe this could be something, Luke, if you're listening, for like a WWF someday, but like, I cannot even think of a world in which I come at a written piece of work and don't just instantly assume every word in there was intentionally chosen. Like, and it's because it's been so drilled into my head. And that was one of the most infuriating things to work with kids. Like, they wouldn't really, dude, the author wrote it that way for a very intentional reason, and the fact that you want to change it or something is probably why. So like that, the fact that people won't do that, and I guess I don't even know where this is going, but just as you said that, that's so true to me. Is that the written words and art and music and everything is so much also about what's not there. Yeah. And intentionally not there. And I just think it's neat that you can kind of hit that and dwell on that a bit. Yeah, go.
That made me remember not only a quote, again, surprise, but one of those influences. I'm actually listening to a podcast right now, and again,
people I'm not good enough for you, or what? Like,
no, not like at this very moment, but I'm in the midst of the season. And people know that I have a proclivity towards hip hop, but specifically the hip hop artist, record label owner, and producer LP. Very influential, not only because of his music, but there's a really awesome line in Company Flow, which is his first album when he was like 17 years old. And he says, even when I say nothing, it's a beautiful use of negative space. And it's that exact same thing, right? Like, yeah. I'm just as interested in what's there as what's not there. And I think that's beautiful stuff.
It is. That's huge. I like that study of that in life. And I think when people can start to, that's a really cool place to be when you're cool with studying that and understanding that, and however that manifests, whether, I'm sure some of our science listeners out there teach me this, because I'm sure there's some like labs in science and just studying of the world around us where what's equally as important to that study is what's not there as what's is. So, but let's take you to that hidden treat. And I want this to go certain ways so I could actually engage with you, but I'm actually, part of me hopes that it's something completely out of left field of what this hidden or surprising fandom or activity might be that you want to share with us today. So tell us something. What's something we don't know about old Gregor?
Yeah, no. So you want to talk about like New Japan Pro Wrestling and stuff,
yes. Right? Yeah, wrestling and video games. I'm a one-trick pony, man. That's all I do. But I want to hear something new. What's something else I wouldn't know?
So maybe you do know this, or maybe you don't. But it was again, it's sort of influential because again, it's sort of the things that we sort of absorb when we're young. It doesn't always make sense to us, like how it impacts or how it influences. And, and it's another thing that, thinking back on it, I was like, oh, it's weird how much that sort of influenced the way I viewed life. So like I grew up not only on a steady diet of old movies, like I love me some old movies and old cinema, like, and I'm talking like films, right? But old television, like the amount that my worldview was shaped by Perry Mason, Columbo, and MASH.
Yes.
Right. Like it's just so astounding how much those shows and like that style of television, even like all the old Norman Lear shows and stuff like that, like All in the Family and like all that stuff. It's so ingrained in me, and it's not even necessarily like my generation's culture, but it's seeped into every part of my existence. It's really, it's really, really weird. But I'm not angry about it.
How does that manifest for you now? Do you find yourself like watching Nick at Night, or like what's going on for you?
So like I still oftentimes, if there's like any procedural show, I'm automatically like, it's not Columbo or Perry Mason, right? And I still think, almost like any plot that there is can be distilled down to Perry Mason, right? Like we all got our Drakes, we all got our Harrison Burgers, we've all got our Della Streets. Like there's specific character traits that each of those things within that program that we're just like, and obviously, we're the first person narrators of our story, so we're all the Perry Mason, right? Don't worry, there's only 5 minutes left. He's gonna pull something out of the examination, right? So like just sort of finding myself falling back to sort of that pattern every now and again, not trying to disrupt that because it's so integral. And I, like all of MASH was on Hulu, so I was like, well, looks like I'm gonna spend some time rewatching MASH, right? And like just again being like, oh man, like after Radar leaves, I don't know, man. Like I'm a Henry Blake guy, but Sherman Potter, man, he's pretty cool. And like just like yes, what is that, like the 80s is when that like ended?
Yeah, right? Like, maybe even late 70s. I don't know.
So I don't know, and it's one of those things I often get lumped in with like, oh, you're an old soul, and I grew up with an older brother. I hung out with people older than me. I was always someone who kind of was drawn to older stuff. I write, I bake, and I read things that humans have been doing for a long time, right? So I think as much as I don't like to spend a lot of time watching television. It's undeniable how much television has influenced the way I view the world.
Yeah. Very cool. And so this another question, kind of non sequitur, but you've referenced a couple times now childhood things, and I'll just be honest with you, like I guess until probably right now, I just assumed you kind of popped out a full grown man and have just like been Greg forever. But like, what is like 7-year-old Greg would it surprise him that you're a teacher right now?
7-year-old Greg is awful, as is like 12-year-old Greg and like 17-year-old Greg, 23-year-old Greg. You don't even want to talk to.
No, I do it. Not on this podcast. I guess was teaching, was writing, were these things that you're so passionate about right now? Have these been? I'm gonna guess I know the answer to this based on how you are, but have these been things that you've kind of had on the burner for a long time, or no? You kind of came to them later in life.
Yeah. So reading and writing. So like my mom was awesome. She was always like, whatever you want to read, you can read. I was reading a lot of stuff probably before I should have. The only book she ever said no, don't read was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, because I was too young for it. And so I read it at night, like under the covers of the flashlight.
That was the one book you made sure to read as quickly.
Yeah, obviously, which I still haven't asked her if that was intentional or not, because there's no way she didn't know that I was doing that, right? Like exactly. There's like young children are not smooth in any way, shape, or form. So I've always loved reading, and from a very young age, I've always thought like books are amazing, and like there's a certain power there. There's a certain thing that just makes that activity awesome, and I think a lot of it's because as you know, and most of our readers probably or listeners probably do, I'm very much in my head like all the time. Like overactive imagination. I have like hyper vivid dreaming issues. Like it's all there, and it's all just. And so reading gave me a place where instead of that happening there was something actively sort of helping create that and sort of push it into like something useful or getting something out of it, as opposed to just like, and I'm back in my head again.
Yeah.
But I don't know that teaching was always necessarily what I thought I would do.
Cool.
But it became pretty clear when I got out of high school and was looking at colleges that the things that I liked to do were write, talk about writing, read, and then some other stuff we don't have to talk about. Bake
and golf.
Yeah, well, and it was something like, where can I use those things, right? Like, what can I do with that? And so I was originally thinking like, get an English degree and then go to law school. And then I realized I love legalese, but like, that's not what I want to spend my time on. And I don't want to do that. And so it was pretty easy for me to be like, I'm already getting an English degree. I want to work with high school because that's where a lot of cool stuff is. And there's a lot of cool stuff that I can do. Active opposition to the given world. I've seen it done poorly. Let me see if I can do it better. And so it was pretty quick for it to be like, okay, this is what I can and should be doing.
Nice, dude. Cool. Well, and again, I'm jumping all over the place, but you sometimes say things that make me think. So, all right, I think we're already down to like the pick 2, man. Like we're at the pick 2. We're cruising into the Panera Bread section of this. You ready? Are we ready to get in there, man? And I'm sure we can go and do a little rapid fire afterwards on some of that too. We've talked a lot about learning, but you and I have had some conversations, at least about quarantine and how you've used that time and the learning that you've done. And I wonder, like, just that idea of something you've recently learned, or this concept of lifelong learning, and just your thoughts on it. Because you and I have talked about it, and I'd love for more to know kind of your approach to that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we like, it's so easy, again, come back to that idea of patterns and things like that. It's so easy for us to be like, I know what I know. I got it down. Let's move. Like, we don't have to worry about it anymore. So I think I'm really afraid of that. I think I'm really afraid of like not being able to learn more, or like not having the desire to learn more. I think that pushes me a lot of times to continue to want to learn, which seems weird, right? Like it's the same thing that I was saying when we were talking earlier about like, why do you think people are drawn to like tell you stuff? And it's another thing where it's like, I don't want to analyze it too much. Yeah. I don't want to jinx it, but I think I enjoy learning stuff, and I enjoy being more informed, and I enjoy sort of understanding where other people are coming from. And obviously that feeds into the writing, and it's obviously bolstered by the reading. But it's just like it's a nice thing to do. So I always want to continue to do it. Yeah. And so I've been doing a lot with like alternative meat, like protein sources after changing the diet and everything. So I recently learned how to like turn wheat gluten and water into meat.
Is that tempeh? Is that what we're talking about?
seitan.
Seitan, there we go.
Yeah. But I've also tried some stuff with tempeh and stuff like that. Just it's like really reinvigorating my desire to cook. I was always a baker. I'll bake till I get blue in the face, but like cooking was always like, ugh, what am I gonna do? And so really getting into sort of different cuisines, learning how to do more like noodles without eggs, because again, Italian, right? Like I was like, what? You can make noodles without eggs? I didn't know that was possible, right? I thought it was like you put some flour on the thing, you throw 6 eggs in it, and you work it around with your hand, and then you got pasta. But just really trying to expand in a space that I never really did in terms of cooking, and obviously with the vegan diet stuff, doing way different things than I would before. And just like not trying to fall victim of like, well, I can make that same thing again, or I can just, eat some cereal and be fine. And then obviously, I think every time I go into a story, I learn something. I know that's kind of cheesy sounding, but I just recently was trying to write about some stuff that had to do with natural parks or national parks, sorry. And it was something when I was last down in Southern Illinois, I saw there was Sharpie on the limestone that said like, make America Native American again. And I'm like, it makes sense if you would have done that on like a bench or something that we put here. Like you did it on the stone itself, you idiot. And so like, I didn't want to write that story and not know more about, how those parks were made down there, or like what the history was of the Shawnee National Forest. And so, something that I thought was going to be a quick, couple Google searches. Next thing I know, I'm like knee deep in state parks in Illinois, and like just sort of engaging in the stuff that's going to hopefully make the story seem more genuine and then have a broader audience.
So for someone who likes to learn, and I think you are unique in that. So I think a lot of people like to learn stuff, but it's like very much for in the moment, and then it's gone. Like I'll watch a video on changing this thing or fixing this thing in my house. And so like everybody's kind of got some innate desire to learn. But from my perception of you, I think one of the things that separates you is like you retain a lot of that knowledge and you integrate it into your worldview. And I wonder from your perspective, as your understanding of the world around you grows, as you learn more things, does that make the world seem smaller or bigger to you?
Sorry, I just went through like 3 smart aleck comments about other things I've written that you probably would have known if you would have read it.
You should know me, not everybody else, right?
I know. Your knowledge of the world, I don't think changes its scope. I think your scope or your perspective on it is what changes it, right? Yeah. So I wrote a lot for a short period of time. I was writing a lot about this idea of forced perspective, right? The architectural idea of if you make each level of something smaller as it goes up, then it's going to look taller than it actually is because your perspective is forced in that direction. And I think we do the same thing as a culture and as individuals, right? If we choose to limit our scope of the way we view the world around us, then it is going to get very small. It is going to be very confining. And you're either happy about that and like stoked, or it's terrifying. And so I think of the learning as more lenses through which to view the perspective of the world. And so I wouldn't say that it changes it or makes it seem bigger or smaller. I just think it's more like refining the detail in which I can see what it is I'm choosing to focus in on and the scope at that time.
I love it.
Tim's back again.
No, I heard his voice, but I think did he go by again?
Yeah.
I texted him. I was like, I'll just call you when I'm done. See, you guys, this is what you deal with. You all know it, but it's fun. All right, you talk about. Well, I asked you about the world at large, so I'm actually going to pick 2 out of these because one I just have to know. But the world, if there was one thing you could change about whether it's the world at large, whether it's teaching, whatever it may be, like what's something you just like, I wish I could press a button and boom.
So the best way to describe this, I think what would be awesome is that if we as a society could be able to make decisions about societal change that weren't always directly or indirectly tied to economics, right?
Yeah.
Like I think if we were as a species able to evolve past allowing or making everything like economy essential to everything, whatever part of the sphere of society it is, right? The whole idea of technology was it was supposed to allow us to like go and do philosophy, right? Not enslave us to like have to get more likes on a button or a screen. And all that's tied to economy, right? It's tied to buying more phones, it's tied to the internet, which is commodified. And so if I could I could change one thing in the world, and it's a huge thing, it would be to actually get society where we were always told it was going, right? Let's get that Star Trek Enterprise thing going on, where like there is no more poverty, there is no more issues of like land and resources, and like make decisions for what's best for humans as opposed to what's best for the bottom line or what's best for my political expedient idea at the moment.
It's funny. I was speaking to somebody else in the building today too, and it's funny how transcendent that. And I don't want to go into politics. I don't want to get into anything like that. But just this idea of being driven by one thing, how that impacts us. And I use the story of I was driving home. I let somebody through in traffic and like waved to them, and they waved to me. We were both smiling, and then I noticed something on their car that would indicate what political party they're part of, and I was like, man, why did I do that? And that to me was so sad. Like, if we remove some of those things, whether and everything is tied back to economy, but we use these weird things to make decisions about how we interact with the world that aren't natural. Like my natural inclination there was help out my fellow man. But then I see this other thing that pulls me so far away from that. And I think you're right, man. Money and economy, and just, I mean, if this year hasn't taught us that, my God.
It's Saib, right? You need the Occidental or the other, or Irving Goffman if you want to go sociology. No matter what we're doing, we always form a team, and so there's us, and then there's a them.
Yeah.
And I think if we want to divorce it from economy or politics, moving beyond that as a species, in terms of we've got to have an us and there's got to be a them, I think that would be awesome and transformative.
So straight up utopia. We're going to create one. It's going to be amazing. So when you start the commune, I want in. I'll move in. We'll make this thing happen. So, all right. I think that's been a fairly. I wouldn't say we went to anywhere too negative, but I still want to end on a fun note. I hope it's at least fun.
It's long. We talked a long time.
It was not bad. It was about an hour. Is that about roughly-ish? I mean, that's not too bad. It's probably long for you because you're hoping I'd be done in 10 minutes. Like, I don't want to talk about myself. But theme song, man. First of all, what would it be? And would I be able to hear it? I sure hope so. Every time you walk into a room, I want to hear it. What is it going to be and why?
Oh man, so there's so many. There's so many, and so I was thinking about this when I wrote it because I was like, I hope everyone does this. So first and foremost, yeah, everyone would hear it all the time.
Yeah,
it would be like 10 decibels louder than it should be, right? Like
just slightly, not like too loud, but just
yeah,
like
not too much, but just a little bit where you're like, that's a bit over the top.
Yeah, I'm in.
And so there's the song that I want it to be, and then the song that it more likely would be, right? So the song that I would
do more likely first.
The more likely?
Yeah, because I want to end with wanting. That's where I want to be.
Okay. So and it's kind of a deep cut. There's an instrumental song by Frank Zappa called "And Cheetah's Arf of You," and it's got this banging riff in the middle of it where it's sort of falling over itself. So it's like dun 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 dun, and so it goes from like stumbling over itself to super funky.
Cool.
And I would just want that to be anytime I walked in a room where we're like, oh no, what's happening? And then it just
that middle part.
Yeah, just nails it at that point, and everyone's like, "Oh, everything's cool again," and like, you know, like, yeah. So like my love for Zappa would have to win out in terms of what's more likely as a theme song.
Yes. What do you want it to be though?
Well, we talked about this when we thought we were going to have to do a wrestling intro at the board meeting, and so. Jefferson Starship's Jane, like just that the wet hot American summer theme song is probably where more people know it from. Just like there's something about that where it's like I am not nearly cool enough to pull that off. But
oh yeah, who isn't, dude? Look at the people in that movie. Come on, you could pull that off.
But just that, and that would be one where it would be something where like anytime you walk into the room, like just the mood lightens entirely. Like it changes everything no matter what.
So I think then hopefully next year, COVID has somehow magically disappeared. We're back in the auditorium for day one. Everybody's in there. SEA takes the stage for their speech. And I just want, like, I know I'll be kicked out. I'll be in the hall, but I want to hear dun, 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 and I'll know you're walking on and I'll be so happy for you, man. So
we'll see if we can make that happen.
Anywhere we didn't go or anything that you wish you want the listeners to hear and know about old Greg here? Yeah, I said that on purpose.
Yeah. I don't know that there is. If people are still listening at this point, this whole thing was started as an exercise in trying to be a little bit more open. And what I learned along the way was being the interviewer is way easier because I'm just allowing someone else to, well, maybe not for you, for me it was. And so I just want to take another moment to not only thank the guests, obviously thank you for taking time out of your day to do this, but just thank everybody. Like the number of people who sent me like kind emails or like said like, hey, I really enjoyed what you're doing, was far greater than I expected. I was really taken aback in the nicest way about it, because it was like, holy cow, like people are enjoying this. And so that was awesome. And I just want everyone to know that I really do appreciate it in this moment of being unguarded.
Good, man. Well, and to hopefully make it as awkward as humanly possible for you, that you'll probably cut from the show, but just to, as a representative of this building, thank you for what you've done. And I don't think people here realize the time that you put in to try to support them. I hope they do. I mean, even if they don't know it's you behind a lot of it, I hope they feel that support. And for someone to put themselves out there, especially that I know it's not your first thing in the morning to wake up and go, I can't wait to go be social, but to see how much you care and how much time you put into this stuff. I know this is not meant to be like the just praise Greg hour, but I mean, we'd be remiss if you're sitting here as a guest and you didn't get a thank you from someone. So to everybody listening, and to you as well, Greg, like you're killing it this year. I think we've done so much more than we could have, and the people here are so much more supported than they could be, and you're a huge part of that. So thank you, man. Awesome.